This course is going to be about plugin called IdeaVim, and this plugin brings Vim functionality into JetBrains IDEs. So if you're new to Vim or have never heard of this editor, this course is not for you. But if you already used Vim for some time and want to try Vim inside JetBrains IDEs, this course will be relevant. During the course, I'm also going to explain each setting from the Vim configuration file that we will use to configure IdeaVim plugin and demonstrate custom Vim mappings that I use to be more productive when using JetBrains IDE. And by the way, I'm going to use phpstorm to demonstrate all examples, but everything will be just as applicable to other JetBrains IDEs. So let's get started. First of all, we of course have to install IdeaVim plugin. Let's open up settings. Here let's go into plugins section and search for IdeaVim plugin. Then let's click on this button install and wait until installation is finished. All configuration of the IdeaVim plugin happens inside .ideavim.rc configuration file that we have to place inside current user's working directory. So I'm going to create file with the name .ideavim.rc in my user's home folder, and then I will open up this newly created file inside phpstorm. And right after we have installed IdeaVim plugin, most of the Vim functionality should already be available for us. For example, to move around the file, we can use keys H, J, K, and L, just like in Vim. But I have actually gotten used to another mappings to move around the file. So first of all, I'm going to reassign motion keys. I prefer to use J, K, L, semicolon instead of Vim default motion keys to move around the file. So basically, to me, all motion keys will be shifted one key to the right. I am doing that just to keep right hand always at the standard position for typing, where index finger will be always on top of J key. So in here I'm defining the following mappings. To move to the left, I'm gonna use J instead of H. To move down, I'll use K instead of J. To move up, I'll use L instead of K. And finally, to move to the right, I'm gonna use semicolon instead of L. And always when we do any kinds of modifications to the IdeaVim.rc configuration file, in order for those changes to take effect, we have to read this file again, and we do so by running the following command. Let's activate Vim command mode first by pressing colon. And then to read this configuration file, we're gonna use source command and specify proper path to the configuration file. And after that, if I'll try to navigate around the file by using new keys, as you can see, it is working. So let's move on. The next mapping that I'm going to redefine in here will be the mapping responsible for navigating to the next occurrence of the character on the same line. Usually in Vim, when we search for certain characters at the same line, we press F and then the character that we'd like to search for. And after that, to go to the next occurrence of the same character, we can press semicolon. But since I have already redefined semicolon to be responsible for navigating to the right, I'm going to use quotation mark instead of semicolon to go to the next occurrence of a certain character. So let's source this configuration file once again for the changes to take effect. And also when we enter Vim's command mode by pressing colon, in here we can use arrow up and down to navigate between recently executed commands. So I'll press arrow up once and execute this source command again. And now, for example, I'd like to quickly jump to the first occurrence of the letter A on this line. To do that, I have to press F and then that letter I'd like to navigate to. And if I'll keep pressing quotation mark, I'll jump to the next occurrence of this character on the same line, so that new mapping is working. And to jump backward in the opposite direction, we can use comma. This is the default key. Next one, let's switch over to configuration file, and here I'm going to add the mapping which will be responsible for redoing the actions. By default, to undo changes, we can use letter U by default. But to redo, we have to press Ctrl-R combination. This combination is quite difficult for me to press, so I prefer to use capital letter U to redo. So I'm gonna define such mapping in here. Let's source this configuration file once again, and now after pressing U, we can see that those changes are discarded. And if I'll press capital U, those changes are applied again. Let's finish up this initial lesson at this point and continue configuring IdeaVim plugin in the next one. Link to the repository with this configuration file will be in the video description. Let's continue configuring Vim inside JetBrains IDE. So if I'm going to yank some word by using key combination YIW, then this text goes to Vim's buffer and we can paste it from there by pressing P in normal mode. But the thing is that if I'm going to delete some word after that by using DIW key combination, everything that was in the buffer before that will be erased and replaced with just deleted text. So that means that if we'll try to paste the text from the buffer by pressing P, we are going to get deleted text, but not that one that we have yanked before the deletion. But I prefer to redefine this behavior so that anytime we're going to delete some content, it is not going to override that content that is already in the buffer. So I'm going to define the following mapping. There is a special kind of register in Vim called black hole. And if we're going to activate this register before we try to delete something, that content that we are going to delete is not going to overwrite the buffer. By default, this black hole register is activated by pressing double quotes and underscore. But I prefer to use backslash instead to activate black hole register. So now if we'll try to do the same, firstly, let's try to yank some text. And then, if I'll try to delete something by firstly activating black hole register by pressing backslash, and then key combination to delete the word DIW. In this case, that word that we have just deleted will not end up in the buffer. So if we'll try to paste the content in the buffer, we're gonna get previously yanked text, but not the deleted word. So the content that we have yanked will remain in the buffer, and that's the behavior that I prefer. So let's move on. For example, let's try to yank some word, and then if we'll select another word, or any other content that doesn't necessarily have to be the word, and then if we'll press P to paste, then that content that was selected will be overridden. But at the same time, it is going to end up in the Vim buffer, so it will override anything that was there before. And then by trying to paste the content from the buffer by using P key, it is going to paste that content that we have just replaced. So in such cases, when we are replacing something, I prefer to keep the buffer stay the same as it was before the replacement. So let's define the following mapping. I'm going to add some helpful comment, so we will not forget what this mapping will be responsible for. And here I'm basically assigning the functionality of capital letter P to lowercase p. So what this will do is that anytime we're going to try to replace some content by pressing P with the content that is currently in the clipboard, we are not going to override the clipboard. So I'm going to source configuration file once again because we have made changes. And now let's try to do this again. I'm going to firstly yank this word, and then let's select another word and press P to replace selected text with whatever is currently in the clipboard. As you can see, it worked, but at the same time, if we'll try to paste the content that is currently in the clipboard, we're going to get not the replaced text, but that text that was in the clipboard before the replacement. Next one, I'm going to sync two clipboards together because in Vim there is a separate clipboard And that means if we'll try to copy some text by pressing default keyboard shortcuts to copy Command-C on macOS or Ctrl-C on Windows, the copied text will end up in the default clipboard of operating system. And that means if we'll try to paste the content from the clipboard by pressing P, we'll get different content, not that one that we have copied into clipboard of operating system. And also if we'll try to yank the content inside Vim's clipboard, and then let's try to paste it inside another app by pressing Command-V, we'll get a different content, not the one that we have just copied by using Vim keyboard shortcuts. So I'm going to add another setting in here that will allow us to keep both clipboards, operating system clipboard as well as Vim clipboard, in sync. And after saving the changes and sourcing this configuration file again, if we'll try to copy something by using Command-C and then paste it by using key P, we'll see that the content that was copied into clipboard of operating system has been pasted. And vice versa, if we'll try to yank something by using Vim key Y and then paste it by using Command-V, we'll get the text that we have just yanked by using Vim key. And this is all about syncing clipboards. Let's move on to another thing. In Vim we can easily jump between opening and closing braces. It also works for square brackets, parentheses, and so on. But if we'll try to do the same with angle brackets, let's try to press %sign to jump to the closing bracket. We can see it doesn't work for angle brackets. And thankfully we can easily make it work. It's just a matter of adding another setting in here. And the setting is called Match Pairs. So let's assign the following value. Source this configuration file again. And try to jump between angle brackets this time by pressing %sign. Actually, sometimes sourcing configuration file is not enough and we have to fully restart an IDE. So I'm gonna restart it right now. And let's try it out again. And there we go, when I'm pressing %sign, we are jumping between opening and closing angle brackets. There is also a default keyboard shortcut in Vim that allows us to join lines together, and that is Shift-J. But IdeaVim plugin improves this behavior and allows us to join lines in a smart way. So that means that while joining lines, it will take under consideration surrounding context. So for example, if we'll now try to join these two comments together by pressing Shift-J, we'll basically get two lines joined together, but comments themselves have not been merged into one. But let's see what will happen if we'll now enable the smart joining functionality. So let's add the following option, IdeaJoin, in our configuration file. Let's source it. And the difference will be that after joining these two comments, we'll end up with only one comment. So those two slashes have been removed. And that works not only for comments. If we'll open up documentation page that is dedicated to this smart joining functionality, we can see that we can easily join two strings into one, several conditional statements into one, and there are a couple more constructs that this smart joining functionality works with. Unfortunately, when I was trying it out in phpstorm, it only worked with comments, but when I have tried it in IntelliJ IDEA, all these examples seem to be working. So that's about it for this lesson. Let's continue working on the configuration file in the next one. Link to the repository with this configuration file will be in the video description. To make it easier for us to work with Vim configuration file, I prefer to define two keyboard shortcuts that will allow us to quickly open configuration file as well as source it. In other words, quickly apply changes without having to manually run command source. So to quickly open up any file by using Vim command mode, we firstly have to activate command mode by pressing : and then we have to run command called edit and specify the path to that file that we like to open. and after pressing enter we can see that the file has been opened. But as you may think, this is pretty time consuming and inconvenient to open up files by typing all this command. So I would like to define the following mapping that will allow us to quickly open up configuration file. So I'm going to assign the following key sequence: leader C C. And the leader is a special key that we'll define later on in this lesson. So when I'll press this sequence of keys, I'm gonna run the following command to open up configuration file, the same that we have just run in the command mode to open up this file. So now let's try it out. But don't forget that anytime we make any changes to this configuration file, we have to source it first to apply those changes. And now we are ready to try this new keyboard shortcut to open up configuration file. Actually, in order for this keyboard shortcut to work, we have to define a leader key first. And the leader key in Vim is a special key that is used in lots of different keyboard shortcuts. And it is really important to choose such a leader key that can be pressed as easily as possible. So in my case, I'm going to define leader key and assign space. This is pretty popular choice for the leader key because it is easy to press by both hands. And after this, the following sequence of keys basically mean space, C, C, pressed sequentially. And finally, let's source this configuration file, open up another file, and try to press space C, C. The configuration file has been opened. So that means that newly defined mapping worked fine. And since we have to source configuration file anytime we make any changes to this file, instead of typing source command manually every time, I'm going to define another mapping to quickly source configuration file. And for this I will use space CS. Just to make it easier to remember this sequence of keys, letter C means config and letter S means source. So now let's try to source configuration file by using keyboard shortcut. For example, currently I have smart joining of lines enabled if we'll press Shift J. But let's see what is going to happen if I'm going to disable this behavior by commenting out this line. And now we'll source this configuration file by pressing space CS. But as you can see, smart joining still works, so for some reason it didn't work. Actually, sometimes, in order for some changes to take effect, we have to fully restart the editor. So in this case, I will have to fully restart an IDE. And since I have disabled smart joining behavior, in this case, smart joining didn't work. But the moment I'm gonna uncomment this line and source configuration file this time by using our newly defined sequence of keys, space CS. This time smart joining worked, so sourcing the file by using keyboard shortcut works. And anytime we'll have to do any kind of changes in the configuration file, we don't have to manually type source command in order for those changes to be applied. All we have to do is press space CS to source configuration file. And that's about it for this lesson. We have simply defined two useful mappings to simplify the process of working with Vim configuration file. Link to the repository with this file will be in the video description. Let's see how we can improve Vim's search functionality. So to start searching for something, we firstly have to press slash, and then we'll get search input at the bottom left corner of the window. And now we can start typing search query and press enter to run the search. And then we can navigate between search results by using keys N to go to the next match and Shift N to go to the previous match. But of course it is not convenient if those search results are not highlighted. So I prefer to always highlight search results after we run the search. And to do this, I'm gonna add the following setting called HL search. And now let's source this configuration file by using sequence of keys that we have defined in the previous lesson, space CS, go back to the previous file, and right away we're seeing that all search results have been highlighted. And anytime I'm going to run new search, we'll see that new search results will be highlighted. That is the behavior that I prefer. Also, it would be good to remove this highlighting whenever we need. So to make it possible, I'm going to add another mapping. I'm going to assign the functionality to remove highlights from search matches to escape key like this. And the command we have to run to remove the highlighting is called nohlsearch. To activate this command, we also have to press enter at the end of this command. Actually, let's try to remove the highlight by running this command manually in the command mode. So let's activate command mode by pressing colon and run nohlsearch command and press enter. And right after that, we can see that all search matches are not highlighted anymore. Now let's not forget end source configuration file once again by pressing space CS. Switch over to the previous file and run the search again. So all search results have been highlighted, and now I can easily remove this highlighting by pressing enter. It worked. So we can move on and add other settings. By default, when we search for something, this search is case sensitive. I'd like to make it case insensitive, so I'm gonna switch over to configuration file and add the following setting to make the search case insensitive by default. And the setting that we need is called ignore case. Let's check it out. I'm going to run the search, but this time I'm going to use all lowercase letters. And even though there are no such words with all letters lowercased, we still have found some words, those that start with capital letter. So the search is case insensitive now by default. But of course, it's good to have such option to run case sensitive search when needed. And thankfully there is such option in Vim that can make search case sensitive when we will use at least one letter capitalized in our search query. But actually before doing that, we have to activate smart search. So in here I'm going to add a comment and then let's apply the setting called smart case. This is the setting that will make search case sensitive in case we're going to use capital letter in the search query. So to demonstrate case sensitive search, I'm going to make first letter of the third word up lowercased. And now we'll run the search by using word up, where the first letter will be capitalized. And this way we have found only 2 matches, so the last word, which had only lowercase letters, have not been included in search matches. So this search was indeed case sensitive. At the end, let's add one more useful option also related to search functionality, which will enable so-called incremental search, because right now, in order to search for something, we have to firstly type in the whole search query and then press enter manually to run the search. But I prefer to run the search automatically the moment I'm gonna start typing. And as I'll be typing, the search results will be revealed. And the setting that we need to add to enable this incremental search is called inc search. Let's source the new changes, go back to the previous file, and start searching for something. And right away we're seeing that as I'm typing, search results are highlighted automatically, and I don't even have to finish my search query or press enter. And for me, this kind of behavior is more preferable when it comes to searching. And that's about it for this lesson, where we have reviewed several options related to searching functionality. Now let's talk a little bit about word navigation in Vim. We know that we can use key W to go to the beginning of the next word, key B to go to the beginning of the previous word, key E to go to the end of the next word, and finally, sequence of keys G, E to go to the end of the previous word. But these keys are not going to work if, for example, we'd like to jump between words that are combined into one word by using different notations such as camel case, snake case, and so on. Because if we're going to use those keys, we'll be jumping over the whole word at once. But there are also additional sequence of keys that allow us to navigate between words that are combined into one word. So to jump between words in one big word, we can use sequence of keys, opening square bracket W. This way we'll be jumping to the beginning of the next word. And to jump to the beginning of the previous word, we can use opening square bracket B. And then to jump to the end of the next word, we can use closing square bracket W. And to jump to the end of the previous word, we can use closing square bracket B. But especially for me, I'd like to use normal keys W, B, E, and GE to jump over such words. So I'm going to define several mappings in configuration file and bind functionality to jump over words that are combined into one big word by using different notations to those single keys. So in the first case, instead of pressing sequence of key opening square bracket W to go to the beginning of the next word, I'm going to use just W. The next mapping will be pretty similar, but in this case, I'm going to use key E to jump to the end of the next word. And finally, we're going to define a couple more such mappings to bind key B to be responsible for jumping to the beginning of the previous word. Instead of pressing sequence of key opening square bracket B, and to jump to the end of the previous word instead of pressing closing square bracket B, I'd like to use sequence of keys G, E. And what all those mappings will allow us to do is to use the same key to jump around words, regardless if those words are part of bigger word or individual words. So now it's time to check it out. Let's not forget to source this configuration file by pressing sequence of keys space CS. Let's switch over to the previous file and try it out. So now I'm gonna press W, and as you can see, as I'm pressing W, I navigate to the beginning of the next word that is part of this bigger word that uses camel case notation. And if we'll try other keys to move to the beginning of the previous word by pressing B, or to move to the end of the next word by pressing E, or to go to the end of the previous word by pressing G, E, all those keyboard shortcuts have expected behavior. By the way, I have also noticed that when pressing sequence of keys space CS to source configuration file, for some reason, it highlights all matches of the previously executed search. I'm not sure why exactly that happens, but at least we can fix it. So let's switch over to the configuration file, find the definition of this sequence of keys to source configuration file, and right to the end of this command, let's add the following command to remove highlight from search matches, no HL search, and press enter. So that means that when we're going to press space CS to source configuration file, besides sourcing the file, it is also going to execute no HL search command to remove highlighting from search matches. And now if we'll try to press space CS once again, we will see that search matches are not highlighted anymore. Also, to make it clear what the following set of mappings are responsible for, I'm going to add additional explanation right here and say that those shortcuts are responsible for word navigation that also takes under consideration different notations such as camel case. But please note, this is not only applicable to camel case notation. If I'm going to use different notation such as snake case, we can see that those mappings work with this notation as well. I can easily navigate to the beginning of the next word as well as beginning of the previous word. And also, I can easily navigate to the end of the next word and previous words by using the respective keys. So that's about it for word navigation. In the next lesson, we'll move on to something else. So let's talk about window splits. In JetBrains IDEs, in order to split the screen by half, we can use the following command called split right. And then to add another panel at the bottom, we can use command called split down. And then to be able to quickly jump around all these panels, I'm going to define keyboard shortcuts inside IdeaVim RC file. Of course, this can be done from within the IDE itself, where we can remap certain keys, but I prefer to do it inside IdeaVim RC. So in here, I'm going to add the following mapping. In this case, I'm going to use key combination Option or Alt-J to move to the left panel. And then I'm going to add 3 additional such mappings to move to different sides. So for example, to move to the bottom panel, I'm going to use Option-K. Then in order to go to the top panel, I'm going to use Option-L. And finally, to go to the right panel, I'm gonna use Option-semicolon. And as you might have guessed, such notation where I have specified opening angle bracket and then capital A is responsible for key Option or Alt on Windows. And the other notation where I have used opening angle bracket capital C is responsible for the Control key. So I'm basically redefining default Vim mappings to move around splits and assigning new ones. So instead of using mappings where Control key should be pressed, I prefer to press Option instead. And then I have basically assigned such keys to move around panels that I use to move around the file J, K, L, and semicolon. So let's not forget to source this configuration file by pressing space CS. And let's try it out these shortcuts. So now I'm gonna try to navigate around these splits by using Option and Motion keys. And as you can see, it is working. My cursor is jumping into different splits. So now, since we have defined mappings to move around splits, why don't we define additional mappings to quickly create additional splits, horizontal as well as vertical. So the first sequence of keys, which is leader WV, will be responsible for creating split to the right. And in my case, leader key is space key that we have defined previously. And by the way, such notation where I have used keyword action followed by command identifier, such notation is exclusively provided by IdeaVim plugin, which does not exist in usual Vim. So basically, each command in JetBrains IDEs has unique identifier, and we can use those identifiers in order to assign keyboard shortcuts to certain actions. So the first mapping is responsible for creating split to the right. The second mapping, which is leader WH, is responsible for creating panel at the bottom. And also I'm gonna define a couple more mappings to easily remove splits. The sequence of keys leader WW will be used to remove certain splits. And finally, key combination leader WA will be used to close all inactive splits. Now, after sourcing this configuration file once again, let's try newly defined keyboard shortcuts. For example, I need to quickly create panel to the right, and to do it, I can press space WV, and then to create split at the bottom, I can use space WH. H means horizontal, and V means vertical. And to navigate around those splits, we can use motion keys with Option key. Option J to move to the left, Option L to move to the top, Option K to move to the bottom, and Option semicolon to move to the right split. And then to quickly close additional splits, I'll use space WW. Once again, let's try to create a couple more splits by pressing Option WH to create horizontal split. And then one more time, let's press space WV to create vertical split. And once we are done and we no longer need additional splits, we can press space WW to close them. Or we can also use additional keyboard shortcut, which is space WA to close all inactive splits. And by the way, those command identifiers we have used in these mappings, they can be found in a repository called intellij action IDs. So here will be a huge list of action identifiers. Some of these identifiers we have already used, such as unsplit, and unsplit all. And also there might be some cases when the same keyboard shortcut can be handled by the IDE itself and by the IdeaVim plugin. So in order to tell an IDE what should handle certain keyboard shortcut from this list, we can manually specify it from this drop-down, whether it should be handled by the IDE itself or by the IdeaVim plugin. And then if there will be a need to manually assign the handler for a certain keyboard shortcut, we can do it anytime from here. This is it for this lesson. Let's keep going in the next one. In this lesson, let's explore several useful commands that will allow us to quickly navigate around the codebase. So the main window that we can use to navigate around the codebase is this global search window, which can be opened by pressing Shift twice. This window has several additional tabs. In the first tab, we can search for absolutely anything, and all other tabs are responsible for searching by using certain category, such as searching by file names or class names. So what I usually like to do is to provide quick access to each of those tabs by using keyboard shortcuts, and that is why I'm going to define several mappings in here. The first one will be responsible for opening up global search window with classes tab active, so I'm going to use space SC keyboard shortcut, and the action identifier in this case is called goToClass. Let's source this configuration file and try this keyboard shortcut. So I'm going to press space SC, which by the way means search for classes. And right away the global search window has been opened with classes tab active, and I can easily search for any class from here. Then I'm also going to define shortcut to search for files, meaning that when I will open up global search window, the files tab will be automatically active. So for this, I'm going to define another shortcut, which will be leader SF, which means search for files. The command identifier in this case is goToFile. And of course, after sourcing new changes and pressing leader SF, we can see that the global search window has been opened with files tab active, and we can search for files right away. Next one, let's add a couple more shortcuts to quickly open up search panel to search for symbols, as well as to search for actions. To search for symbols, I'm going to use space SS, and to search for actions, I'm gonna use space SA, which means search for actions. And I try to choose such keys that can be pressed as easily as possible, without having to move hands from the standard position for typing. And sure enough, if we're going to try those keyboard shortcuts, we can see that in the first case, when pressing space SS, we got search window with symbols tab active, and when we press space SA, we'll get actions tab active. Now, a very common use case is to quickly navigate to the declaration of the certain element. For example, I'd like to quickly jump to the declaration of this base class. And to do this, I'm going to define another keyboard shortcut, which in my case will be space GD, which means goToDeclaration. And the command identifier is called goToDeclaration as well. Let's source new changes and try to press space GD while having our cursor on the particular element, and right away we can see that we have been jumped into the file where that element is defined. The same thing is going to work for types. Let's say I'd like to quickly open up definition of this channel type. And to do that, let's define another shortcut. I'm going to use sequence of keys space GY. And when this sequence of keys will be pressed, it should activate the command called goToTypeDeclaration. So from now on, if I would like to quickly inspect certain type, all I have to do is to firstly position the cursor on that type and press sequence of keys, space, G, Y, and right away corresponding file with type definition has been opened. In a similar fashion, we can also go to certain implementations. So for example, if I have some base class which is inherited by several other subclasses, and I'd like to know all the subclasses, I have to position the cursor on the base class name and then press keyboard shortcut that I'm going to define right now. So to quickly see all implementations of the base class, I'm going to use space G I, which means go to implementation. So after sourcing new settings, once I'm gonna position the cursor on top of the base class name and then I'll press space G I get such list with all the classes that inherit from this base class. And I just have to choose certain class from this list, press enter, and that file will be opened. In JetBrains IDEs, there is also a way to quickly switch between classes and its corresponding test classes. So I'm going to assign separate shortcut to do that. I'm going to use space GT, which means go to test. So it works in the following way. If I currently have my cursor positioned on top of the test class, and I would like to quickly navigate to the original class, I just have to press space GT. But if my cursor will be positioned on top of the original class already, when I'll press space GT, I'll be navigated to the corresponding test class. Alright, let's add a couple more shortcuts. I'm going to use space GM to quickly go to super method, but it works not only for methods, but also for base classes, implemented interfaces, and used traits. So to demonstrate this feature, I will firstly position my cursor on top of the class which implements interface as well as inherits from the base class and also has a couple of traits. And then if I'll press leader GM, we'll get such list with all those classes that the current class is based on, including implemented interfaces, base class, as well as included traits. And then we will be able to quickly open up any file from this list. And finally, I'm going to add one more shortcut in this lesson, which will be responsible for navigating to a certain line. So once I'm going to press sequence of keys leader GL, I will get such dialog where I can specify the line number where I'd like to navigate to, but not only line number, we can also specify column number. And after pressing enter, I'll jump straight to that location. That's about it for this lesson. We have reviewed several useful keyboard shortcuts that are used to make us faster when navigating through our codebase. Link to the repository with this configuration file will be in the video description. Before we proceed to defining new keyboard shortcuts, I have noticed that there is one mapping which is responsible for removing highlights from search matches. This mapping works in all Vim modes, but actually we need it to work only in normal mode. Otherwise, if we're going to activate visual mode to select some text and then press escape, it is going to not only leave select mode, but also remove highlights from search matches. So I would like to make this mapping only work in normal mode. And we can do so by simply adding another letter N in this mapping, like so, which basically stands for normal mode. After doing this change, we might need to fully restart an IDE. And from now on, the mapping to remove highlights from search matches will only be active when we are in normal mode. So now that we are done with that, let's keep adding new keyboard shortcuts. The first mapping I'm going to add in this lesson will be responsible for executing find usages command. I'm going to use space UG for this command. And now, after sourcing the changes, let's try it out. First of all, we have to position the cursor on top of some element, and then when pressing space UG, we'll simply get additional panel with the list of all those places where this element is being used. And we can just select any element from this list, press enter, and navigate to that place. In addition to this mapping, I'm going to add another one, which will be pretty similar, but instead of showing results in a separate panel, it is going to open up floating window with all the places where particular symbol is being used. For this, I'm going to use space UU, and the command is called show usages. Let's also add another mapping to quickly view source of a particular symbol. So by pressing space VS while having our cursor on a particular element, it is supposed to open up the file with the definition of that element. So let's try these two shortcuts. I'm going to position the cursor on the controller class name and press space UU. Right away I'm gonna get such floating window with the list of all the places where this symbol is being used. And in case I'm gonna have to quickly navigate to the source file where a particular element is defined, for example this authorizes requests trait, I'll just press space VS and the file with the definition will be opened. But sometimes it might also be useful to open up such definition in a floating window instead of opening up the file. So I'm going to define the following shortcut space IM, which stands for implementation, and the command that we need in this case is called quick implementation. So let's source new changes by pressing space CS and try it out. Once I'm going to press space IM, I'll get such floating window with a definition of the element. Another very similar command to showing implementation in a floating window is called quick type definition. It is going to show definition of the type. Also in the floating window, I'm going to position the cursor on a particular type, and after pressing sequence of keys space TED, I'll get a floating window with the definition of this type. And by the way, TED stands for type definition, to quickly memorize this shortcut. The next two shortcuts will allow us to open up pop-up with some helpful information about certain elements. The first shortcut will call the command named expression type info. So what this actually means is that when we are going to select certain expression and then press this shortcut, it is going to show us the type of this evaluated expression. We will try it out in a little bit, but for now let's add one more shortcut, and this one will show pop-up with quick documentation. Once again, let's source the configuration file and try the first combination. I'm going to firstly position my cursor on some expression and then press space TI. I'll get additional list where I can choose which expression I'm interested in, and after pressing enter, we'll get the type of this expression. And as for the other shortcut, which is used to show quick documentation of a particular element, once I'm going to position the cursor on some element and press space SH, which stands for show hover info, I'll get such kind of window, which in this case is the signature of the constructor of the reset password notification class. And finally, let's add one more mapping in this lesson, which is going to be used to show the file structure. So for example, if we're inside of the file with class definition, by pressing the following sequence of keys, which is space OO, we will be able to quickly see all the properties as well as method of the class. After sourcing this file, I'll switch over to the definition of with relationships trait, and when pressing space OO, I'll get floating window with the structure of this trait, which in this case only shows all available methods in this trait. And by the way, we can use the following keyboard shortcuts to navigate through the list. To go down, we can press Ctrl N, which means next, and to go up, we can press Ctrl P, which means previous. And these shortcuts to go up and down in the list work not only for this list, but also for others. And this is it for this lesson. We'll keep going in the next one. Let's assign keyboard shortcuts to make working with search and replace functionality easier. So by default, to search for something in a file, we can open up the panel with the search by pressing Command F. And also, there is an additional input in here, which allows us to replace search results with some other text. So for this functionality, specifically to open up panel with the search and to open up panel with search and replace fields, I'm going to assign keyboard shortcuts. Let's open up configuration file and add additional mappings in here. The first mapping will be responsible for opening up panel with the search. Command identifier in this case is called find. And the second mapping will be for opening up that same panel, but with replace input visible as well. And now after sourcing this configuration file, let's try it out. I'm going to press Shift F and we'll see that the search panel is open. And now if I'm going to press Shift R, we'll see the same panel, but with replace field already visible. So this was the local search, but we can also open up the panel, which allows us to search globally. We can press Command Shift F and we'll get such global search panel. So let's switch over to configuration file and I'm going to add a couple more mappings to open up this global search panel. Command identifier in this case is called find in path. I'm going to use space FF to open up global search panel and to open up that same panel, but with replace field visible, I'm going to use sequence of keys space FR. And after sourcing configuration file, we can easily press space FF to open up global search panel. And then if we press space FR, we'll get the same panel, but with replace field visible as well. So that's all for the search and replace functionality. In the next lesson, we will move on to something else. JetBrains IDEs provide us with lots of features when it comes to refactoring. If we'll open up global search panel by pressing Shift twice and then execute command called refactor this, we'll get such dialog where we have several options to do different refactorings. And as you can see, some of these options already have keyboard shortcuts assigned to them. But I actually prefer to assign new keyboard shortcuts where leader key will be used. So I'm gonna switch over to .IdeaVim configuration file and add several new mappings. The first mapping will be responsible for renaming certain element. The identifier is called rename element. I'm going to use space RN to call this refactoring. The second refactoring will be used to extract certain functionality in a separate method. I'm gonna use space RM to do this refactoring. Next refactoring option allows us to extract certain expression or value in a new variable. I'm going to use space RV to do this refactoring. Next refactoring is pretty similar to the previous one, but in this case, instead of extracting certain expression or value in a separate variable, it will extract it in a separate class field. I'll use space RF to do this refactoring. Another refactoring will be change signature. This refactoring will basically allow us to change signature of methods. And I'm going to use space RS to do this refactoring. And finally, last mapping that I'm going to add in this lesson will be responsible for opening up the panel where all possible refactoring options are listed. I'm going to use space RR to open up the dialog with refactoring options. And after sourcing configuration file, let's try to use all of these keyboard shortcuts. So the first one is space RN. When we'll press this sequence of keys, we'll call the refactoring to rename variable. Here we can type new variable name, press enter, and the new variable name will be applied. Moving on to the next refactoring, which is extract method. For example, if I'll firstly select some logic and then press space RM, I'll get additional window where I can choose which expression exactly I would like to extract in a separate method. And after pressing enter, we'll see that that part that we have chosen has been extracted into a separate method. For the next refactoring, which is introducing variable, we also have to firstly select certain expression or value and press space rf. And we will see that the new variable has been created with that value that we have previously selected. The next refactoring is also related to extracting values, but this time not in a local variable, but in a class field instead. And to do it, I'll have to select the value to be extracted first and press space rf. And we'll see that the new class field has been created with this value assigned to it. To demonstrate the next refactoring option, which is changing signature of methods, I'm going to create new method in here, and then while having my cursor on top of this method, I'm going to press space rs. We'll get this additional window where we can modify signature. Here we can change access modifier of the method, its return type, as well as its name. And when we press refactor, we'll see that the changes have been applied. And finally, last keyboard shortcut is used to open up the dialog with all available refactoring options. So if I'll press space RR, I'll get this dialog where I can manually choose which kind of refactoring I would like to perform. And that's about it. We will continue adding keyboard shortcuts in the next lessons. Sometimes light ball icon appears with the list of quick actions that we can perform with that code. I have this behavior disabled, so I'm gonna have to switch over to the settings, then go to appearance section and enable the following option called show intention bulb. And once I'm gonna hover over this code, we can see that this light ball icon appears. Here will be a list of quick actions. But in fact, it is much faster if we can open up this menu by using keyboard shortcut. I have keyboard shortcut, option, enter responsible for opening up this menu. But we can also register keyboard shortcut in our .IdeaVim configuration file. So I'm gonna switch over to this file and add the following mapping, which will be space AA, which is going to open up that menu with quick actions. Command identifier is called show intention actions. And now after sourcing this configuration file, let's try it out. I'm gonna press space AA, and we can see that the same menu is open. So I don't have to hover the cursor over the code in order for this light bulb icon to appear. So I'm gonna go back to settings and disable this option, show intention bulb, because I can always open up that menu with quick actions by using keyboard shortcut. And by the way, don't forget that we can always navigate through the list, including this list with quick actions, by using keyboard shortcuts. To go down, we can use Ctrl-N, and to go up, we can press Ctrl-P. Next, JetBrains IDEs provide us with the feature to surround certain code with some statements. For example, we can select some part of code and then execute the following command called surround with. We get such window where we can choose which statement we'd like to surround the selected code with. And in order to get quick access to this menu, I'm going to define the following mapping, which will be space SW, which is a shorthand for surround with words. Don't forget that anytime we modify this configuration file, we always have to source it first. And then if I'll press space SW while having some code selected, I'm gonna get the same surround with menu. Also, JetBrains IDEs have powerful capabilities when it comes to automatic code generation. For example, if I'll press Command N, I'll get such window where I can choose what I'd like to generate. For example, we can quickly generate class constructor in such way. So to open up this menu, I'm also going to add the following mapping. And I'm going to use Shift space to open up that menu for code generation. Alright, now let's switch back to the previous file and press the following shortcut, Shift space, and we'll get the same menu for code generation. Next, let's consider how we can quickly duplicate the current line. For example, in Vim, to duplicate the current line, we can firstly yank the line by pressing Y twice, and then to paste, we can press P, and as we can see, the current line was copied. But I'm going to make this process easier by registering the following keyboard shortcut. So in order to duplicate a line, I'm going to use keys Shift K. The command identifier is called editor duplicate lines. And now, as many times I'm going to press Shift K, as many duplicated lines I'm going to get. In JetBrains IDEs there is also an option to complete current statement. For example, if I start typing if statement, and without finishing this statement, if I'll run the command called complete current statement or press keyboard shortcut Shift Command Enter, we can see that curly braces will be automatically added to this if statement. It works for a bunch of other statements as well. For example, for method declarations. If I'll start typing method declaration and without finishing this statement, I'll run the same command to complete current statement. Right after running this command, we can see that parentheses as well as curly braces have been added automatically. So just to be able to do it quickly, let's define another shortcut. For this command, I'm going to use Ctrl opening square bracket. And now, after sourcing configuration file, the moment I'm going to press Ctrl opening square bracket, while having my cursor on top of method declaration, this method declaration will be completed, as we can see. And that's about it for this lesson. Link to the repository with this configuration file will be in the video description. JetBrains IDEs run code inspections and identify errors in our source files. And in order to navigate through those errors, I'm going to define the following keyboard shortcuts. So to go to the next error, I'm gonna use space E N sequence of keys. And to go in the opposite direction to the previous error, I'm going to use space E P shortcut. Let's not forget to source configuration file before trying this out. And now I'm going to switch over to the source file and make a couple of syntax errors in this file. And now let's try to navigate through these errors. So to go to the next error, I have to press space E N. And to go to the previous error, I will press space E P, which stands for error previous. Another useful feature of JetBrains IDEs is to quickly navigate to the last edited location. So I'm going to define new keyboard shortcut. To do that, I will use space LC in this case, which means last change. Command identifier is called jump to last change. So now let's just do some changes in this file, and then I'm going to go to some other place. And in order to go back to the place that we have just modified, we can press the space LC, and right away our cursor jumps into that exact location. But we can not only jump to the last edited location, but also jump over recent location where our cursor was. So to open up the list of previous locations, I'm going to use keyboard shortcut space LL, which is going to open up the window with recent locations. So now I'm going to do a couple of changes in this file, and right after that, if we'll press space LL, we're gonna get such list, which we can use to go to a location where our cursor was previously. So that was navigation by using cursor locations. We can also open up the list with recently visited files. In my case, I'll have to press Command E to open up such list, but I'm going to define another shortcut to open up the same list. So let's just add another mapping in here, which will be control semicolon, which is going to open the window with recent files. So now after sourcing the file, if I'll try to press control semicolon, as we can see, we get the list of recently opened files. And we can navigate through this list by using whether key combinations Ctrl N or Ctrl P, or by simply using arrows up and down. Or we can even start typing right away in order to filter down this list, and then press Enter to open up a particular file. By the way, we can also navigate through the history of places where our cursor was previously, so I'm going to define additional shortcuts to do this navigation. To go to the next cursor position, I'm going to use Shift-K shortcut. And to go to the previous cursor position, I'll use Shift-L. And I try to use such keys for these shortcuts so that my fingers on the right hand will always stay in the standard position for typing. Because in my case, keys K and L are used to move up and down in the file. And actually I have just noticed that I already use shortcut Shift-K to duplicate the current line. So in case you use the same shortcuts, come up with another shortcut for moving forward action. Let's source configuration file once again, and then instead of opening up list of recent locations by pressing space LL, we can also use keyboard shortcuts, which is Shift-K and Shift-L. So right after I'm gonna do a couple of changes and then try to press the following keyboard shortcuts, we can see that our cursor moves back and forth in between those edited locations while pressing those keyboard shortcuts. Sometimes it might also be useful to navigate in between methods in the class. So I'm gonna add a couple of shortcuts to do exactly that. So to go to the next method, I'm going to use Option opening square bracket shortcut. And to go down, I will use Option closing square bracket. So now if we'll try to press these shortcuts, we will see that while pressing Option closing square bracket, we are navigated to the next method. And while pressing Option opening square bracket, we are navigated to the previous method. And by the way, in case you didn't know if our cursor is positioned somewhere inside the block, to quickly go to the opening block brace, we can press opening square bracket, opening curly brace. And to go to the closing block brace, we can press closing square bracket, closing brace. Another way to navigate around the codebase will be to navigate between tabs. So I'm going to use space and N to navigate to the next open tab, and space PP to navigate to the previous tab. Even though I currently have my tabs hidden, I still can press space and N to go to the next tab and space PP to go to the previous tab. But in fact, I already have keyboard shortcuts to navigate between tabs defined in IDE settings, and those are Command K and Command L. So I'm going to remove these two shortcuts from here. And that's about it. Let's continue defining keyboard shortcuts in the next lesson. Now let's talk about formatting. In order to apply formatting to the current file, we can run the following command called reformat code, and right away we can see how the current file was formatted. But since I'm going to use this feature pretty often, I'm going to define keyboard shortcut that will be easy to press. It will be just space twice. The command is called reformat code. So now let's try to break formatting in this file again, and this time I'll press space twice. Right away we can see how the file has been formatted. Let's try it out again. Press space twice, and there we go, the file was formatted. Another similar command when it comes to code style allows us to organize imports, meaning that we can quickly sort imports in the alphabetical order or remove unused imports, which in this case, all unused imports are dimmed. So to organize imports, we can run the command called optimize imports or press shortcut Ctrl-Option-O in my case. But I prefer to add another shortcut to do this action, which will be space OI, which stands for optimize imports. So after sourcing configuration file, let's press this keyboard shortcut and see if imports will be sorted and unused imports will be removed. And there we go, everything is working as expected. Another command, also related to file formatting, allows us to rearrange elements in the class. It moves all property declaration to the beginning of the class and all method declarations to the end. I'm going to use space RA to run rearrange code command. So before trying this shortcut, I'm going to swap positions of some elements in this class, move the method declaration at the very beginning, and now if I'll press space RA, we can see that property declaration was moved to the top and method declaration was moved to the bottom. So we only have to move this straight to the beginning of the class manually. So in this lesson we have reviewed 3 useful keyboard shortcuts that allow us to automatically rearrange and format code. Link to the repository with this configuration file will be as always in the video description. Sometimes when editing code we have to move lines around. And to do this, I'm going to define the following shortcuts. So to move the current line down, I'm going to use Ctrl-K shortcut. And to move the current line up, I will use Ctrl-L. And right after sourcing this configuration file, if we'll try to move the current line by pressing Ctrl-K to move it down or Ctrl-L to move it up, we can see that the line is moving. But in this way we can only move individual lines. But what if we need to move the whole statement, for example the whole if block? And to do that, JetBrains IDE also provides us with commands. I'm going to bind keyboard shortcuts to those commands. So to move the whole statement down, I will press Ctrl-I. And to go into opposite direction, I'm going to use Ctrl-O keyboard shortcut. Once again, let's source new changes. And now, for example, I have to move the following if statement down. To do this, I can press Ctrl-I and the whole if block moves. And to go up, we can press Ctrl-O. And as you can see that surrounding statements also move respectively. Let's try it out once again. For example, I need to move this validate method call. So I only have to press Ctrl-I to move down or Ctrl-O to move up. And at the end, let's add 3 similar shortcuts to basically copy-paste to the current file quickly. So the first shortcut will be responsible for quickly copying the absolute path to the current file. And to do this, I will press space CA. Then to copy only the file name of the current file, I'm gonna press space CN. And finally, when I'll press space CP, it is going to copy the path to the current file, starting from the project root folder. So let's see if it works. I'm going to try those shortcuts in order. Let's start with the first one. Space CA is supposed to copy the absolute path to the current file. So once I will paste, right away I am seeing the absolute path to the current file. So the first shortcut worked. Next one, which is space CN, which is supposed to copy only the file name. And then after pressing P to paste, I can see the file name. This one also worked. And finally, if we'll press space CP, it is going to copy the relative path of the current file starting from the project root folder. And this one worked as well. Let's continue defining keyboard shortcuts in the next lesson. In JetBrains IDEs there is an option to quickly create so-called scratch files of different formats. And to create the new scratch file we can run the following command: new scratch file, or use keyboard shortcut, which in my case is Shift-Command-N. And then from this list we can select any file type that we need, press Enter, and the file will be created. And all those scratch files will be created in the special folder called Scratches. Sometimes it might come in handy to create such scratch files during development. For example, whenever we need to save some piece of information or during testing. And to quickly create such scratch files, I'm going to define keyboard shortcut. And for this, I'm gonna use space FS. The command identifier is called new scratch file. And after sourcing the changes, let's try this keyboard shortcut. So I will press space FS. Right away we can see that list of different file types appears. And we can choose any file type, press Enter, and this way new scratch file will be created. Next, I'm going to define shortcuts to be able to quickly close current file or all open files at once. So to close current file, I'm going to use shortcut space QQ. And to close all open files, I'm gonna use space QA, which stands for quit all. So before trying this out, let's source configuration file, switch over to another file, and try it out. Let's try to close this file by pressing shortcut space QQ. As we can see, the file was closed. And if we'll press space QA, all the files will be closed. Next, let's simplify the process of working with files. I'm going to define keyboard shortcut that will allow us to quickly create new file, which will be space NF. The command identifier is called new file. And in a similar fashion, we're going to define another shortcut to create folders. I'm going to use space ND, which stands for new directory. So in JetBrains IDEs, we can create new files by firstly focusing on the file explorer and pressing keyboard shortcut Command N. And from here we can choose what we'd like to create, file or directory. But now, since we have defined keyboard shortcuts, we can also quickly create new files in that same folder where currently open file is located. So I'm going to press space NF to create new file. In here I just have to type new file name and press Enter, and this way the file will be created. And the process for folder creation will be the same. So I'm gonna press space ND, we'll get the same input to enter new folder name and press Enter, and as we can see, new folder has been created. Let's switch over to configuration file and define a couple more shortcuts for simplifying file management. So I'm going to use space RE shortcut to quickly rename current file. And another shortcut that I'm gonna add here will be for opening files. I'm going to use space OF, which stands for open file. And now after sourcing configuration file, we can quickly rename current file. All we have to do is to press shortcut space RE. We get such window where we can enter new name for the file and press refactor. Let's try it out once again. I will press space RE, then I'll type new file name and press refactor. And that's all, the file is renamed. And for those cases when we need to open up any file in our file system, we can press space OF. We get Finder window where we can choose which file we'd like to open. And lastly, I'm gonna add one more shortcut to quickly reload an IDE. I'm going to use space RI to restart an IDE. So whenever I need to restart an IDE, now I just have to press space RI. And as we can see, the IDE was restarted. And this was actually the last keyboard shortcut that we have added in this series. Hopefully some of these keyboard shortcuts have improved your efficiency and you have become more productive while editing code.